All right, welcome everyone. Hopefully we're all in the right room to check out the speed up media uploads in WordPress. My name is Matt Dorman. I'm going to go through a couple of intro slides and talk a little bit about what's going to come next. I get my screen right. All right, this is a quick slide about my company or our company based out of Colorado. I used to work and live out of New York City, so I've been to Drupal camps up there and Drupadelphia quite a few times and presented in the past, but now I do WordPress only. So we're a distributed company, so we're lucky enough to be working from home all the time anyways. Quick, all that stuff. So about me, like I said, I'm partner and technical architect, so I'm a developer at Endeavor. I have a BS in computer science. I got it way back when people actually thought it was necessary. So I've been doing this for about 21 years. Most recently has been WordPress, so about 6 years in WordPress. A little bit of that was overlapped with Drupal. Did a lot of Drupal for enterprise media and publishing sites. Before that, I worked on some other CMSs. They were all proprietary, so things that no one would know about, and they're all gone anyways. So helped me in the later years of Drupal and WordPress, though, because they were very large sites of the day and had to deal with a lot of the same issues. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's how to do it. I got my email at the end. And of course, I'll be in Slack if you have follow-up questions. So I got the dogs there because I am doing this from home. And, some other people mentioned some time issues, time management or whatever in time zones. So I'm in mountain time and, I kind of scheduled everyone to be out of the house in 2 hours from now. So the dogs are around, and if I get deliveries, which is unlikely, they will not be as calm as they are in that picture. So the house will light up with excitement. So hopefully that doesn't happen now. So in this talk, I'm gonna go through the media upload process in WordPress, not just from the the visual part of it, but actually showing you what happens in case you don't know, and show where kind of the bottlenecks are and how we've identified some areas where we can fix in some of our solutions. But first, we'll talk about some I call them partial solutions and recommendations. They're really good solutions, though, if you're looking to make some quick updates for things that you didn't know about before. You thought the media upload process was slow and you really weren't sure how to do it. So I'll show you some debugging and finding ways of doing that really simply, actually. And then talk about some other plugins that are out there that are doing other parts of media upload, or actually media management and delivery. We'll talk through and walk through some video demos of an example site with 16 image sizes. So for us, 16 is kind of on the medium to small size, really. Most of our sites are in like the 40 image sizes, which sounds like a lot, but they're very customized themes with multiple images for every resolution that you can think of, essentially. So they have to have a lot of image sizes for that. So we've seen the bottlenecks really firsthand on some of those larger sites, and that's why we've developed some of these options for us. So I will go through our solution, and I call it our solution, but it's open source essentially. I mean, it's on GitHub. It'll eventually make its way to WordPress.org, most likely as the plugin side of it. But we took pretty much what we've been building for a while and made it more generic. So the versions that are up there now are probably buggy, although they've been working well with the demos that I've been doing. So they're not the finalized versions that we had. We rolled back some features and also just made it more configurable. So we'll continue to work on that as well, but we'll go through it in the demos. And then talk about some next steps, kind of some other ideas that we have, and more of this will be driven by other people's kind of thoughts and things like that. So, and of course, questions. So I leave questions at the end, but I'm happy to be interrupted, and I've got the questions up here, but it's a little tiny window, so I may not actually see your question until the end, but feel free to ask them during it, especially if you're having problems hearing me or seeing or anything like that, or want to see another slide. If you want me to roll back, I'm happy to do it. So let's get into it. So what's the media process look like for uploading an image in WordPress? So similar to pretty much any CMS, you have an upload. The UI looks a little differently, but they all do the same thing. They upload a file. That's the first step in WordPress. And then you wait for it to upload, and then, well, this happens sometimes, right? This is no different than any other CMS out there. I mean, file uploads happen for various different reasons: bandwidth issues, network issues, if you're working in an office or home now and coffee shop. So this will happen, unfortunately, more often than not that we know of if you looked at your logs, but people just don't complain about it. So they try again, they get past that. So in WordPress, the first kind of step after the file is actually on the servers. It'll look at the file, it'll look what's in here, right? Is it an image? Is it a PDF? Is it a Word doc? So for our example, we're only going to be dealing with images and speeding that side of it up, because WordPress doesn't do a whole lot to other types of files. It basically just puts them in there. But so once it figures out that it's an image, it's going to start doing a resize. So resize or image sizes is defined both in the theme, or sorry, in core, first off, but also in plugins. All the plugins can have different images. And then it also, of course, in your theme. So all those different places can add different image sizes. So what happens is you end up with that 16 count or 40 count, potentially really quickly without even knowing it, just by adding some other plugins or changing your site to a new theme. So it'll start to go through that list and generate one after the other. It's completely synchronous, so it waits for one to finish and then the other one, and then it, again, something like this happens and an error happens. So at this point, no record was put in the database. WordPress itself doesn't even know about those files, but they're on the server. They can clutter up the server, and we've come in to not really rescue, but take over sites. And we see the disk space is massively overused, and that's because people have gone through this process, 20 times, let's say, and it just keeps failing for them. So they get 20 times the number of image sizes it generated. So they try again, they get through all that, they get through all the image sizes, it goes through all the different sizes. The next step is it creates a post. So it adds a post record in the database, in the WP post table. It basically gets an ID, gets a name, it has the slug for the file name. And then it goes from that point, and it already has all the image sizes, and it'll add it to a post meta, the table, specifically for this post ID. So with that, it's actually getting the actual sizes of the images. So if you had a thumbnail, thumbnail is 150 by 150. Let's say the aspect ratio wasn't square, so it'd be 150 by 76 or something like that. And then it'll do it for all the images. So all the images are the exact image size, and also just other metadata about the image in there. So that's important here, that it had to get the exact ones, because part of our process is we update that table later on, because we have to do it once we get the actual image sizes, and otherwise we could have done it right here. So I'll show you that later. And then of course success, and the user gets a little thumbnail image in WordPress, and it shows them, and they can move about their day. So where's the problem in this? Well, the first step is potentially the problem, but where we've identified is the image size generation, because it has to do it over and over and over again, and it's a synchronous process, and as the site grows, this gets slower and slower without the user even knowing it, or the editor rather knowing it, or knowing why. So big part of our solution that we'll show later is solving that, basically, and making it do it on a totally separate server. So gonna go through a partial recommendation, right, or partial solution. And by partial, it's really, this will help some things, but it's still, we've implemented these and still have problems. But first thing you can do is, audit the site images. And that sounds bigger than it is. Really, it's figuring out what sizes are being generated, decide if you actually need them, and I'll show you how to do that. Then you review the site's images again, and that's not an oops, it's saying do it again because other things add it later on, and I'll show you how and when that's happened recently. So the two actual solutions are, you can remove the unused sizes. So once you have the audit, you can just remove them, and I'll show you how to do that. It's real simple. And then you can also, another option is to modify the unused sizes. So you can kind of combine them to have less images on the server. So how do you find those image sizes? Pretty easy. If you have WCL access, either locally or on your production servers, well, your dev servers, let's say, you just do WP media image size, and from that you get an output like this. So some caveat or some notes around this. This is actually our site, and we actually like to not necessarily break our site, but we use a lot of different themes on our site and restyle them to to be the same look, because we like to use different themes to find out what's kind of going on in the industry. We have sites that are really high-end, enterprise, fully custom, but we also work with companies that don't have either the budget or even the need to have sites like that. So they use off-the-shelf themes that are, you know, paid or even from Drupal from WordPress.org. So in this case, it's a premium theme, has a bunch of different sizes. We've cleaned that up since then, but this would be, you know, out of the box what you would get, a bunch of different sizes that are pretty close to each other. On the right is how you would do it without using WP CLI. So if you just wanted to paste in some code, this is not unique to me. I found this somewhere else at some point along my development career, and I've just re-implemented it. So what's going on here is it's getting there's a global variable that it gets stored at, and if you do it late enough in the init, so 9999 or 999 is pretty late. So all the core ones have obviously been done, but even the plugins and your theme should have already defined their sizes at that point. You could always add a 9 if you really needed to. So that'll output it for you, and you can see it pretty quickly. So when I talk about re-reviewing your site's images, this is exactly why. So it's not just plugins. This is in core. So the core developers in 5.3, they did quite a bit of image optimization, but one of them was to add 2 additional images. Now this is a great benefit for blogging sites and sites that use really basic themes because they got some better image sizes potentially. But this is getting applied to every single site, regardless of what theme you're using or what plugins you're using. So they've decided that we all need a 2000 by 48 by 2000 by 48 image, as well as a smaller one for our image sizes, and they're going to add that in. So most sites, this is just a couple of extra image sizes, and it's not gonna matter that much. But we actually had a site that just this addition alone put it over the edge essentially. You know, it was having other issues, but adding another image size was completely messing up their image upload process. And they were failing essentially every time, or almost every time they were uploading, and it was giving, you know, one of those error steps that I was showing you before, and the editor was seeing nothing essentially, and the server was just, you know, hanging for timing out. So we were able to remove this by auditing the images, but we also found a couple others, obviously, as you always do when you start to look into a site, and cleaned up the image sizes for things that they didn't need. But again, you know, everyone's basically adding image sizes all the time. Here's another option, the next slide, of plugins, the way plugins add it. So this plugin was on a site that we almost added this plugin, but we ended up not, and not due to the number of image sizes, but it just has some other performance issues. But if you look at the list that it's adding, it's adding a lot of just kind of smaller size images that are either probably pretty close to like the 100 by 100. Why wouldn't you just use a 150 by 150? I mean, it's a bit it's smaller, but it's not that much smaller, right? And you can kind of go down the list and see some of the same ideas. So you could audit this and modify them. You're probably not going to delete them unless you know the plugin really well, or remove them. But this next step is how you would remove. So again, similar. So using the WordPress core as an example, this is actual code that we've added to a number of our sites that are using custom themes. They all get this because we don't need these 2 sizes. We use other sizes that were already defined as part of the theme. So there's no need to have these ones. You know, we have ones that are similar based on the actual requirements of the site. So you just do remove image size and the string of your image size, and that'll remove it. And that'll stop it from both being resized, so the image processing will be reduced, but it also not try to render it on the front end as well. So that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on which images you start to delete. So the other part that I said, you could modify unused sizes. So in that plugin example, you know, the 100 by 100 would be a great example. If you needed to use that plugin, well, you could combine your thumbnail size, which is essentially 150 by 150, with that one. In this example here specifically, I'm doing the 2 core sizes of thumbnail and medium because they're pretty close to the same sizes as well. Now, what this doesn't do is help fix the issue of the uploading and resizing. By combining two image sizes to the size of the image, it'll actually still go through the loop and it'll still generate the image. It just overwrites it. So what this helps with is your disk space. So if you're on a host that has a limited amount of disk space, this could be a long-term solution for not continuing to increment that up if you need all these image size strings. And the reason you would need those is if there are hard-coded references to these sizes, you actually still need them in the system. You just don't need the duplicate or the different size, the physical sizes or names. So in this example, we're giving two ways of doing it. They do the same thing, but the one on top is actually what you'll find a lot of times if you Google this, and you'll find this on Stack Overflow where it just says update option, and then the _W and _H options are what defines the width and height of that image size. And this works because it actually updates the option to the values. The problem is that it runs every single time a page view is hit. So it's constantly doing a SQL update twice for every page view, and it's doing to the options table, or the WP options table. So it's actually clearing cache also. So if you're going to do it via code, this is actually the way I would highly recommend. You get the values and then you check the values to see if they're not equal to each other. If they're not, then obviously you update it. And this happens one time. So it'll do this one time, and then from that point on, it's always equal. You could even remove this code if you're wanting to go that route after that. Or you could just do it, you could manually update these values. And that's probably the more preferential way, so you're not having extra code in here that's actually not being used. But again, these are two very easy ways of cleaning up your code. The first one is really the best way, because you're deleting or removing that extra processing of the images and removing a lot of overhead as well. So talking about some plugins. So what about this plugin or that plugin? What we found once we've seen this issues for a long time, but once we decided we really wanted to try to fix it, we tried to find some plugins that would help this. And since this is so ingrained in core, that image size generation, we haven't found any plugins that are doing what we're gonna talk about a little bit later. But these are really good as well for just general performance. So you've got Smoosh and Imagify. These are both, they have services that you utilize or not, paid services. So they do some post optimization of the images, and then for delivery they do some good services. But both of those still have the image getting processed on the server, and then size and all the image sizes generated, and then it sends it off, and then it does more processing there, and then it does some communication back and forth. So good plugins, but not solving the problem that we were seeing. WP Media upload or offload and S3 uploads. These two kind of do the same thing, and these are two examples of other plugins, or many plugins that do these types of things. Each one of these two, not necessarily the best or whatever, but things that we've actually used and we know they work. These two will basically take the delivery of the image and the storage of the image and put it off onto another server. So it's still, again, same thing, it still has to process the image, but then it sends it over there, so your disk space isn't being utilized. And then also for CDN usage, they have better CDNs potentially that they'll utilize. So a lot of the server kind of interactions is happening off, in this case, offload to those, but not all of it. And then I throw in Jetpack because it does have some performance optimizations, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But it also has, so it has a lot of features as well. So with features, you're getting performance degradation. I mean, there's no way of getting around that technically. So they've got some optimizations, but then they also add a bunch of image sizes, potentially depending on which button you click. So obviously you want to evaluate that as soon as you install it, or as soon as you install and start configuring it. You want us to take a look at some of those images if you want to be good about your optimizations. So let's take a look at a demo. And I hate doing live demos, which is why I've recorded these demos. So assuming I don't have a bandwidth issue, and I haven't been talking to myself for 20 minutes, these should play just fine. So the first one is the 16 images on just it's our site, but it's an out-of-the-box site without our plugin installed. You go through, you select your image. Obviously, you click open. It's going to start updating it. So as a typical editor, photo editor, they get to sit here and wait and draw infinity lines and kind of twiddle their thumbs and keep waiting and look around. Maybe they did some multitasking and went did their other thing, but the server's doing all those things that I was telling you guys about before. It's processing them. It's eventually going to get update the database. No, there it goes. Finally, there's the medium size, and then there's the full size rendering, and it's a 1 meg file. It's kind of hard to see, at least for me. But it's a 1 meg file and 250 by 250. So I go over here to S3. This is where we're storing our images. So again, that didn't help any, but at least it's offloading this storage. So at 15 seconds, it started the first image. And if I go down here, it's 34. So 19 seconds. We should probably add in, so that first one is when it finished doing that file. So maybe 20 seconds of physical file kind of manipulation and management was taken up by image sizing. Some caveats to this one. It's a development server with 0 traffic. It is hosted on Pantheon, so it's a decent development server, and it's ours. But there were no other editors. There was no front-end traffic. WordPress is unless you decouple it, it's a coupled system where the front end can't affect the admin. So in real-world scenarios, this is going to be a lot slower, even with 16 image sizes. And it's a 1 meg, so it was a somewhat optimized image, even though it's a pretty large one. You could have larger ones that they're uploading, and then it takes even longer to resize. So that's a pretty good. So this will be an apples to apples comparison more than anything to see what other improvements can happen. But the reality is that it can actually be a lot slower. So with offloading, hopefully make sure I click on the right one. Yeah. So this is with our plugin enable, and we'll show enabling it just to show you the speed difference, and then we'll get into the details of what's happening. So I wanted to go over here to S3 just to see that I emptied out the folder. I've already deleted the last one. This is the settings page, and I'll try to click. Yeah, I'll pause it real quick. So that was actually pre-selected because I had done a video recording and deleted that one, but the first time around it was not selected. We have an API key and API URL that says change me later in case you really want to look at it. It has been changed later. We give some options here to select. So these are all the image sizes this site has, and you can select the ones. We found that probably thumbnail and medium are the ones, either both or one, are the ones you'd actually want to be generated by WordPress, and all the rest of them you can allow it to generate a little later. And when you see the process, you'll understand why you need at least one of them, or should have at least one of them. So save the changes. Plugin is now fully enabled. I'm going to go back over to the media section and do the exact same process as before with the same file that we had before. So again, it's a 1 meg file, pretty large dimension-wise, and sit here and wait, of course, because WordPress does have to do a little work, and it has to resize the one, and there it's already there. So again, same size, show there, close it out. We're going to go to S3 just so we can see the time differences, and they're all now there. And if I sort by last modified, we have starts at 51, but then it goes to 55 is when this part starts. And if you look through, they're all 55. And then the last one is 58, and that's the 300 by 300. And that's one of the little bugs we found when we started to refactor some of this work. That the size that we want WordPress to do is actually getting regenerated and generating a little slower for some reason. So if we see that process, right, the other one took 20 seconds. This one took 1 second to generate all of them. And then there's some additional seconds around WordPress doing its thing. So we can talk about that as well a little bit later. So much faster. And this, because they're asynchronous and on a totally different server that you could size differently, you could have 1,600 images for all it cares, and it would generate it almost as fast, most likely, if not as fast. So what is this one doing? It's still doing the upload, which means it could still fail, just like regular ones. It's still having to pull the files, the metadata out of it, because it has to still see if, is this an image? Is it something else? And then from there, it's going to start to regenerate generate some of those sizes, because again, we've decided we want at least the medium one, which is the preview that you get to see, available to the editor right away, just in case the Lambda part doesn't finish right away. We don't want to have them see broken images and get scared. So once that's done, though, it goes ahead and triggers a Lambda function that we've written, and we'll go through. So that's being handled in parallel, so it doesn't wait for that to finish, although it actually could and still be fast, but it doesn't, in case you wanted to make it like a bunch of image sizes. It goes through the next step, is it attaches or creates an attachment post ID, and then it updates the post meta, and it's successful, right? And all the while down below, this is happening in parallel, and probably just it's pretty much as fast for the small amount of images. But the Lambda function is not kicking off a bunch of other Lambda functions as it kind of is represented here. What I just wanted to show here is that inside the Lambda function, it asynchronously starts internal functions of resizing the images. So it'll synchronously run the entire function, but inside of it, it has some asynchronous stuff that it then waits for. And once it finishes, it sends over to WordPress via the REST API, one that we created, the data for updating the meta table, because it has to have all the right sizes. And then WordPress is perfectly happy and it moves along just fine. We were saying, sorry, there's a question. I just wanted to double check it. Oh, so it's a question about the auditing process. I'll go back to that when we get through the slides, just so you can see that. But it's all, so WP Media is a WP CLI command, and then image size is a documented function. So there's nothing custom there, just to get an idea of what sizes are being passed in. So what are some potential limitations around this implementation? Well, it still has to wait for WordPress to start, as we saw, so that we're still seeing some, in my opinion, some slowness, but obviously much faster than a minute or even 40 or 50 seconds. So that's good. But it is still waiting for WordPress to optimize it or to upload it. So we could take even that first step and essentially decouple the admin a bit, and take that button and just do something else, right? And then you don't have to worry about WordPress, and then it just updates WordPress with everything when it's done. Another problem is the parallel resizing. So that could happen at any point, and then it would fail. So right now, our plugin and Lambda function don't really communicate failures very well. They log it, but the end user, or the editor rather, wouldn't see that it failed or why it failed. They would just know that once they started to look at the site, it would be broken right now. We've actually not seen this happen, which is kind of surprising given the volume, but it could. And we're looking at updating that at some point. So what is it? It relies on AWS in this case, right? Our code totally relies on AWS. Even if you implemented something different, it would rely on Google Cloud or some other external storage system to do this. So the reason that's a limitation is because it is a more complex solution. And that's probably why there's not a whole lot of plugins out there doing anything like this, because anything they would do on the physical server that itself that would be easy to implement as a plugin really wouldn't help them out very much. You might be able to do an asynchronous one, but it's still going to bog down the server. So that's some limitations around this. So, oops, where's my button? Oh, there we go. So if we want to see some code, just want to check my time. Yeah, we got plenty of time. Actually, let's go back. Oops, I'm going to go back to that question. Just so I hit on that before I forget. So this is where we're talking about auditing. So on the left, it's a WP CLI command. So if you have command line access to your instance or instances, this is how you would run it. We use VVV for a lot of our local development, so it has it locally. If you're running on a Mac, it's pretty easy to install as well. I'm doing this on Windows, and that's pretty easy to run it as well. But if you don't have any of that, you can just write. And if you Google how do I get up my image sizes on WordPress, you are going to come up with probably 100 different variations of the thing on the right, and they all work. And this is just for a one-time use, so you just output it. But I have a variation of this actually inside of the plugin code as well, because we need it for the select box of the options. So let's see any other questions yet. So let's go and check out code. Hopefully this renders pretty well for you guys. I'm just going to go on GitHub. So it is a public repository. And again, we have not done a whole lot of documentation on the plugin itself because we did some refactoring. We take a look at the index file. We can see what files we're doing, and I can talk through those. We've got a settings file. I'm not going to really go through that one because all it does is build that settings page and set some settings that we need for the options that we want. This class attachments is really where all the work is happening. We have a controller for the WP or the REST API controller, so that's getting that request in and calling a function internally. It does some authentication, obviously, and we have a API key, a wonderful one called Change Me Later, if you were trying to do it later. And then we have a CLI file in here, and this was really just for debugging and getting the refactored code to work well. So we're probably going to delete it, but unless we can find some uses for it later on, we'll probably just remove it from the code repository. So if I go into the Inc folder and check out the attachments, pretty standard class, PHP class. So we've got two hooks that we're tying into. We've got a filter for, it's called intermediate image sizes. And then we've got one called add attachment for the actions. The image sizes, that's where we're gonna adjust what WordPress knows or what WordPress thinks the image sizes are. So in our case, once we selected the options, we set that here. So this one allows you to change or filter it to do maybe more image sizes, not likely, but really to reduce those image sizes. So you could, and again, so the original kind of code that I showed you was to remove them, but this is actually allowing us to do it in a little bit more refined way, because since we're eventually going to generate these images, we want all the theme when you're on the front end to always know about all the images. And we also, even in some of the WordPress, the admin pages, like if you're on the post page, for instance, we want WordPress to know about the images. So we don't want to always delete them. So we're just doing it in a little bit more refined way. It's also, this is a lot faster way when you're deleting a lot of images. So the other way you would have to call the function, for every image size you want. For this one, we're essentially just returning a new array. So if I go down to remove default image sizes, we see that we're calling another function in here. This is get only approved, and all get only approved does is goes to the options that or the settings options that we set, and then it returns an array. So that says sizes is now this array. In this case, is an array of one element for what we demoed, and then it returns that sizes. So again, I could go loop through all the sizes and say which ones do I want and remove each one, or I can just return a new array. And this is obviously, quote unquote faster. Either way would be super, unnoticeable to us. And then the other filter is the hook, or the other hook is the action, sorry. And this one is to be able to fire the Lambda, or fire off the request to the Lambda function so that it will start generating those. So we have to do this late enough so that it has the attachment ID or the post ID that happens to be an attachment, as well as the file name, because Lambda, the Lambda function needs to know where the file is, and then also that post ID, so that when it sends it back, it can update the right metadata. So add attachment start generation. Let me search for that. Hopefully you guys are all seeing it. I'm not seeing any comments saying you do not. So really this is just doing a bunch of stuff with strings and then setting up a request. So it gets the file GUID, which is the file, local reference to the file, and then it sends it over to the Lambda function. It's nothing special. And here is passing in the key, and key in this case is what Amazon calls file names or file locations, really. The post ID and then the options API key, which is what keeps it somewhat secure. This other function, just go through that. So I'm not going to go into the REST API or the controller. All that does is it's all basic stuff to set up so that the requester responds to it, and then it sends the information to this. It does some validation and security again, but then it sets up this one. Check over here. Can't read this. Actually, I can't read the questions. Sorry. And I can't change the size. All right. Hopefully we'll go through them after we're done. So what this one's doing is it's going to get a request from Lambda, and it needs the attachment ID. It does some basic logic to, it has to load in the image kind of library or file, because this is a REST API request, so it doesn't bootstrap the entire WordPress. So you have to pull in some files additionally. We're also telling our internal function to not limit the size by doing this. So it doesn't set the only approved, so it allows all the images, because we obviously want to update those. It compares the images that are already in the options table, or the post attachment updates, and it'll compare that to the full list and only get the list of things that are not available yet. So that's what missing image size is. So there's code inside of core that will regenerate the missing images, and that's great for when you add a new image, but there's nothing inside of core that will update the data only, unfortunately. So we had to write that. We had to pull code from code to do that ourselves. And the reason that it doesn't do that, because why would that ever happen, right? Based on the workflow we saw, it would really never get to that point unless it failed before it ever updated the database ever at all. So if it gets to that point, WordPress just assumes, it's all good, so it adds to the table, and it doesn't have a way to kind of separate that out, unfortunately. And so it's all kind of inline in its code. So we pulled that out and allowed ours to do only the update of the metadata. We have these couple lines here, just in case the Lambda function did fail. This would fire, and this is a WordPress core function that actually does the updating. This one updates the attached metadata. This one down here, the make subsizes. So this one will do any of the ones that are missing in the list that didn't exist. So if Lambda failed at some point, it would actually generate it for us. So it's doing it on WordPress, it's doing it on the file, the server, so it's backing it up a little bit. The editor didn't have to wait for this. And it's really just as a backup in case something ever failed in the future. But again, we want to build this in a little bit more so it's less error prone, and this should never have to happen in the future. And then it sets the only approved, but that doesn't really matter since it exits after this anyways. So we still have time. Hopefully everyone's not telling me to not do the more code in the questions, but I'm gonna go through the, oops, oh, great.
Hey, Matt, I've got a
yes.
question for you. And if you want, we can open it up and unmute everyone. Chime in.
Oh, yeah, that works too.
That makes it easy and they don't have to type. So for the audience members, if you guys have a question or some comments, you can unmute yourselves now and chime in. I'm going to start with my question. So when it comes to all of this, do you, because you're storing all these images on Amazon, do you have, like, when you have a staging instance of the site, for instance, are you pointing to that same server on Amazon, or do you have a copy of all the files in duplicate?
Yeah.
When we work with some of our hosting providers, I work primarily with Drupal, they just copy all the files over again, which can really be a hog on space.
Yes, unfortunately. So we work with WordPress with Pantheon a lot, and if you do that, they obviously have great tools of synchronizing the environments and the files. Once you go outside of that, you're having to deal with it yourself. So we have some synchronization scripts that we've written. However, if we want to update from prod, yes, we have 3 buckets. Since we use S3, we have buckets. So we have a dev, a test, and a live bucket, and even a local bucket. So we have technically have a 4th one that we have to synchronize. They have some really good commands now. They didn't a couple of years ago that actually only synchronize missing files at least. So what used to take hours, and you still pay for the storage, but it's for some of these even bigger sites. But then it synchronizes and you pay for the bandwidth of the synchronization, obviously. But unfortunately, there's no like continuous synchronization of them that we know of.
Thanks.
Yep.
Anyone in the audience have any questions? All right. I'll let you wrap it up, Matt, with any closing remarks you might have.
Yeah, so I've got the Lambda ones, but I'm not going to actually go into that one. It's obviously available, and I know it's the end of the day for everyone. There's nothing really special in there. The only thing that was a nice part of it, and this is because it's Node, is that we could do some of it asynchronously. So while the whole thing has to wait for them all to finish uploading, that's the reason why all 16 generated in 1 second versus each one taking synchronously a second of time. So feel free to take a look at that code. Again, this code that we're showing here is not the production code that we have, but we're hoping over the next weeks or so, we're going to be rolling this into sites that we've already put this on. And keep asking me questions, or we can go to the virtual happy hour.
We're going to try. I can tell you the organizers are really happy that we got through this day.
I bet. Well, it's only 2 o'clock or almost 2 o'clock for me, but I'll have to join in. All right.
Thank you everyone for participating. On the general channel in Slack, if you entered the different raffles that we had for the WP 101 memberships and the Drupalize Me memberships, the winners were just announced. So you can check that out, and we'll have information on how to claim all of that. And as I mentioned earlier on some of the different talks that you might have sat in, we will have recordings of all of these talks posted online as well and share that with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thanks a lot.